Welcome back. I just posted part 1 of a 2-part survey project on historical accuracy in film, and part 2 is coming soon, but that will be another longer video. So I wanted to put something out super quickly where I wouldn't have to do a ton of research or scripting. Also as like a thank you, since it was an entire year since my last video before that one. But I still think this will be relevant as an extension of the conversation about historical film and as a more topical way of getting at it, since filming recently started on Christopher Nolan's Odyssey and it looks heinous. I haven't been following this super closely, but it recently crossed my mind that unlike many canonical literary adaptations in pretty much every tradition on the globe, the Odyssey has never had an adaptation that has really taken hold in pop culture to the degree of many others, despite the ubiquity of its source material far surpassing almost any other work of literature in the world. Nor is it for lack of trying, as I discovered when I looked up Homer's writing credits on IMDb. So to be fully transparent, I don't have a huge personal stake in this. I don't particularly like the Odyssey, but I do find it an interesting question, and I haven't seen anybody else talking about this particular angle on it, so I do hope that some interesting discussion might come from me making it into a video. I also wanted a break from the longer video essays, so I did want this to be super fast, so I did no research, I didn't watch anything, I didn't read anything. I have read the Odyssey in ancient Greek and in English, and I watched part of the 1997 miniseries, so I hope you trust me to talk you through my thoughts on this. And before we start, no, this is not revenge on the Odyssey community for flooding the Antinous tag for no good reason. I'm aware that some of what I say might be controversial. I do have a critical perspective on the Odyssey. It's just not a work that I really connect with. I've never enjoyed it. I've never felt connected to it. So I know at some points it might seem maybe like I'm being intentionally shady towards the Odyssey, and that is not the case. Nor is this me trying to talk down to anybody who may enjoy any of these adaptations, many of which very much have their own artistic merit and are well worth watching. If you've seen my Apuleius video, I can tell you, when I'm being intentionally rude and disrespectful, you will know. Anyway, this is an epic poem from the 8th century BCE. The story is even older, and it has been discussed and criticized ever since then. So I only want to add to that tradition, not take away from the endless productive discourse we could have. So why is the Odyssey so hard to adapt? There are 2 approaches to this question that come to mind for me, both of which have to do with the medium. Let's start at the source. First, there are fundamental aspects of the story that just aren't suited to a feature film and the narrative and time constraints of that medium. This is an epic poem that covers a 10-year period of events, most of which take place outside of chronological order and in a narration. And thanks to all the oral history of the epic tradition, the poem is constantly repeating itself. This is a feature of epic as a genre, but it's not so effective in film. And the type of subjectivity that we get from reading the Odyssey is very, very difficult to convey when it must be mediated by a camera. Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I got into this situation. Well, let's go all the way back to where it all began. A lot of directors interestingly forego the narration entirely, which does create a more engaging plot and linear structure, but sacrifices so much of the epic's character. It's literally the Odyssey. How can you remove Odysseus' voice and have the same story? Also, because of the Odyssey's antiquity, many story elements so key to modern film, or really most media these days, appear very differently or not at all. Speaking for myself, one of the reasons I found the story so difficult in the first place is that there's so little character, especially compared to later works. The Odyssey's characters are very much vectors for the plot, with little agency of their own, and any amount of personality they might have tends to be swallowed up within the larger story. While it is a famous forerunner of the hero's journey, the plot is progressed more by acts of God or gods, and conveniences or disasters beyond the scale of any human action. I don't want to talk too much about adaptations that I haven't seen, But I think that's why acting more than occasionally comes up as a sore point. The material is difficult to work with, and there aren't really character choices that an actor can make in the same way they could with a character that just comes from a more modern tradition. I also wonder if the Odyssey is just so fundamental to the Western storytelling tradition that it's almost redundant to adapt it. When we start calling the SpongeBob movie an Odyssey adaptation, per Wikipedia, where do we stop? The poem is so ancient it actually predates the color blue, hence Wine Dark Sea. As we discussed in my previous video, a lot of modern audiences, especially in Hollywood, struggle to adapt to unfamiliar historical perspectives, and the epic dialogue can come across as stilted when spoken by modern actors, especially accounting for the fact that most of that dialogue was not meant to be spoken at all, but more sung or chanted. As many fans have pointed out online, it's not even common for adaptations to attempt to historically reconstruct Bronze Age Greece, but rather follow classical aesthetics, a practice we do see even in ancient Greek representations of epic subjects. The time period presents significant research challenges, and we have much less material to study from. As with any historical film, the director must make difficult decisions about what historical details to preserve. The other way of approaching this question, however, is that the problem has less to do with the Odyssey itself, and more with the particular artistic choices filmmakers seem to make again and again. So is the epic structure and oral history of the Odyssey to blame, or is it the rigidly commercial medium of modern film? While the Odyssey has spawned many adaptations since the birth of video, few of these have become fully canonized in pop culture or academics. They never really contributed much to the general public's interaction with the epic, nor to the film industry. If we look at these dates, the few silent films and then the gap until the Peplum Golden Era in the 50s and 60s, followed by another likely Clash of the Titans-inspired revival in the 80s, they very much follow what's popular at the time. Another thing that may be just worth pointing out is, in terms of the volume of adaptations, is a lot of them are for very different audiences. Particularly, there are a lot of kind of children's media adaptations, and a lot of those are connected to specific IPs or corporations. I just feel like that's something interesting to point out because I don't think there are many other classics where we really see that happening. And if there's no possibility an adaptation of an ancient Greek epic may perform well at that period in history, no director is going to adapt it. The two most successful versions, the ones that seem to have had the best critical response in 1968 and 1997, are both miniseries, the 1997 version being basically a two-part TV movie. I think this is a smart way of dealing with the poem's scope, and is a case where the repetitive structure can be a great help, since the audience may have forgotten or missed parts of the story in between airings. It also lets the events sit with you, and you feel drawn into the characters more over the span of a weekend or a week, rather than over just 2 or 3 hours. Nevertheless, when I watched the 1997 series, it still felt rushed and kind of affected to me. The 1968 version definitely seems to be the most positively received, but a lot of that is because of its directing that draws heavily on Pasolini's tragic adaptations, and the series has never been released outside of Italy. Also notably, unlike a lot of epic film, the series had more evident budget constraints and had to make narrative sacrifices because of that. So we see the value in sometimes telling directors no. Moreover, most of what we see on this list are what I would call safe adaptations, and I really do see the point of these and appreciate what they're trying to do, especially since we have kind of yet to establish what you might call a definitive, straight Odyssey adaptation. But I also think it's possible the reason none of these are working is because they are so creatively reticent and stuck between not making risky changes to Homer's poem nor to the pop antiquity tropes that audiences expect to see. Maybe our two arguments overlap here, and the antiquity of the poem creates a sense of untouchable greatness nobody wants to mess with. There's a palpable lack of affection and closeness filmmakers have for the story that would otherwise help them feel empowered to change it. Because a lot of really loved adaptations take huge risks, some aesthetic and some narrative. Again, we can see this in how closely the Odyssey 1968 studied from Pasolini, and perhaps a bit from Godard's Mépris, itself a film that chronicles the torture of adapting the Odyssey. Something I think is especially telling is that none of these are really widely referenced or discussed within the fandom. Speaking from both experience and observation, when a work of literature gets a really well done adaptation, or a charmingly bad one, you see people in the fandom sharing gifs and stills, referencing quotes, and often it's very obvious when a specific actor's performance widely influences fan art of that character. I think the proliferation of unsuccessful adaptations makes it difficult for one to become the film or the series that serves as a touchstone of Homeric reception at all levels of culture. I'm sure there is a comparatively high number of Odyssey fans who haven't even seen a single film version of their favorite book, nor have any interest in doing so. And why would they? That brings me to another, Achilles heel of Odyssey adaptations, where they seem to be trying to capture as broad an audience as possible, perhaps from the assumption that everybody knows the Odyssey and everybody loves it the same. But as we've alluded to throughout the video, in today's age, the Odyssey has its own distinct and dedicated fan base, especially online, that should provide a built-in audience for any filmmaker. And I realize if you're not chronically online, even me saying the Odyssey fandom probably made you spit your drink out, but it's true. These communities exist, they are super engaged and super dedicated, and I think it's just a mistake to not do research on what they like and what they're reading and what they're watching. I feel like that's one of the things that was super smart about those 90s and 2000s classic lit adaptations that set The Taming of the Shrew or The Scarlet Letter in American high school. Because rom-coms were popular with American high schoolers who would be reading those books in class at that point in their lives. By contrast, many of these Homeric adaptations aren't really distinguished artistically, but seem like just an excuse to collect as many famous actors as possible and put them in over-financed sets and costumes with generous special effects in the same fashion as an IP franchise movie. This Marvel effect generates a lot of short-term publicity and box office success, but it neither engages an existing core fan base, nor does it use storytelling and artistry to bring new viewers into the world of the Odyssey. Think about how many times you've heard someone say, "I never liked the Odyssey," or "I hadn't heard of the Odyssey until I watched this film." Just have a take. Don't play it straight out of a fake sense of integrity or historicity for a story that is not entirely historical. You can even look at one of the most popular adaptations in the fandom, being Epic the Musical, for an almost perfect blueprint on how to do this. Guys, do not mistake my acknowledgement of successful audience engagement for glazing. When I read anime in Lin-Manuel Miranda, the description was so graphic, my ears started bleeding. But anyway, this musical was produced through TikTok, which generates a lot of organic support and engagement on its own, and it uses colorful animatics and visuals that reflect the fantasy elements of the story. Musically, as I said, the show is influenced by anime in the work of Lin-Manuel Miranda, as well as video games, which are super current references, really popular with younger fans, and they bring elements of modern pop culture into the ancient story without entirely sacrificing its original setting and character. Epic is not a film, but it has the makings of a super successful adaptation. Even commercially, the albums have consistently charted at #1 on the iTunes soundtrack charts, and its first volume, the Troy Saga, charted on Billboard at #2, just behind its spiritual ancestor, Hamilton. Now, don't get too excited, because Epic suffers from many of the issues we've discussed in my historical accuracy video, and it simplifies many of Homer's moral and ethical dynamics, but it's important to acknowledge that adaptations can have these flaws and still be massively appealing and impactful. The main takeaway I think we can get from this is that by going out on a limb creatively and working with built-in audiences, even an independent adaptation made on a tiny budget with crowdsourced acting can reach popularity that rivals professionally staged productions, and I think that sets a strong precedent for others to follow. With those two perspectives, explained as best I can. I thought we could look a little more at the upcoming Christopher Nolan movie and how it does and doesn't play into these patterns. I'd just like to second everybody saying this will be terrible. It absolutely looks like it will add nothing at all to our impression of Homer in pop culture. The one thing I was kind of looking forward to, I'm really sorry, was Anne Hathaway. I always felt like she needed to be cast in some like Greek or Roman history drama. But girl, not this one please. I don't know how controversial this is because I'm not actually that into like letterboxd film culture, but Christopher Nolan, I just don't really see him as like an auteur. Definitely not on any historic scale, nor really on the same level as his more distinguished peers. I think just like past adaptations have ridden the coattails of media trends. Here he seems to be trying to fill Gladiator 2's sandals with the same Hollywood bullshit. I would even see the timeline here is suspicious. Because Nolan is a big name, but like, is he really so worshipped as a director? Because what did he do? Like Oppenheimer? Inception? Anyway, is he that much of a big deal that we announce his projects and get all these posters and casting announcements before shooting begins? Even before the crew is set up on location? We got a cast list before we knew. Like, is it just me? Because I'm not like super tuned into pop culture like that, but I feel like most of the time when the casting for a movie is announced, it's announced as like, this person is playing this role. And we got no roles with the cast list. It was just all the celebrities who were going to be in this movie. The casting, sets and costumes, and promotion all feels so rushed. Everything about it is cheap and ugly. The still screens will fix it in post. The actors so far look just like very uncanny and kind of uncomfortable in their roles. People have pointed out Nolan just casting all the most overexposed people in Hollywood right now, seemingly indiscriminately, as if he wanted to book everybody who would make money and then actually cast them after the fact. Also, unlike many earlier adaptations, there are no Greek or Turkish actors in any of the main roles, which some have pointed out as another missed opportunity to add some authenticity to what is otherwise a very overproduced and stylized spectacle. However, one thing about Nolan's Odyssey that I haven't seen from these earlier films, mostly because I wasn't alive when any of them came out, is that everyone is talking about it. Even, especially, negatively. And the fact that it promises to be bad, I think doesn't say much in the way of any lasting cultural impact. But it is remarkable the amount of presence this movie has right now, especially since it just started filming. So to bring it back to our original question, does this mean the Odyssey is impossible to adapt? Despite absolutely everything I just said, I think honestly we have a pretty good start. Not every book is going to get a stunning, perfect film adaptation on the first try, or the second, or the third, because for the reasons we've discussed, it's demanding. It asks for a level of creativity and flexibility that honestly is hard to pull off in commercial Hollywood for any number of reasons, both because of the source material and because of the creative foibles of whoever its custodian may be at the moment. I hope against all odds that Nolan's film isn't bad, just because we don't need more bad movies in the world. But I will be skipping this one, and I anticipate most people who care about ancient Greece will do the same. Whenever I go online, I see so many talented artists who have such beautiful visions of the Homeric epics and who truly care about these stories, and those are kind of what gives me this optimistic vision, because I honestly would love to see those brought to life someday. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this little glimpse into what's been on my mind lately, and let me know what you think about the Odyssey in film and TV, since I would love to get some other opinions on this topic. Do you think the Odyssey is impossible to adapt? Do you have a favorite adaptation of the story? Let me know. If you want a more in-depth discussion of historical media, please check out my latest, and make sure you subscribe with the bell icon so you know when I post part 2. And I will see you then. Oh, what was that? Anyway, bye!